Good afternoon, everyone. Gareth Fresh, founder of the World Health Innovation Summit. Delighted you could join us this afternoon. A very important webinar today. We're talking about disabilities and inclusion. I'm joined today by a number of special guests. Harry Harrison, Inclusion Director from People First in Cumbria, is with our guest Lou Towson, also a trustee of People First and an expert with lived experience. And David Kerr is sitting in the studio in Microsoft in Dublin. Welcome to all of you. We're going to start today with a discussion around disabilities and inclusions. And I think it's quite astonishing to me that, you know, we've got about 1.3 billion people who experience significant disability. You know, this represents about 16% of the world's population, or 1 in 6 of us. Some of the statistics when I was going through the kind of background for this session is quite alarming. You know, some persons with disabilities die up to 20 years earlier than those without disabilities. And before we came online, I learned those with a learning disability, it can actually be from up to 25 to 30 years. Quite shocking, actually. You know, persons with disabilities have twice the risk of developing conditions such as depression, asthma, diabetes, stroke, obesity, or poor oral health. And I think we realize that persons with disabilities also face many health inequalities and inequities. This session is very much around like how we leave no one behind, and I hope we open up the conversation. If you do have some questions, you know, please do put it in the chat for ourselves, and we'll put it to our guests here today. Let me just firstly go across to Harry and to Lou, who was in a studio in Cumbria. And perhaps, Harry and Lou, you could maybe tell the audience who you are and your background.
I'm Lou Towson, and I've been in People First now for the past 30 years. I'm a trustee for People First, and I also am involved in another organisation that supports people with sight loss, because I myself am registered blind, so I can help other people who are starting out on that journey.
Hi, and I'm Harry Harrison. I'm Inclusion Director at People First Cumbria. Although Cumbria is in the title, we actually have a bigger remit because we work into Lancashire and we also work into the North East. And one of the main parts of our work ethos is that we provide a voice for people with lived experience that wouldn't normally be able to have that voice within their communities and within the system that they work with. So whilst we work with people with learning disability and autism, we also work with the wider communities who need a voice for their disabilities. And I think it's probably worthwhile, Gareth, sort of saying there is a distinct difference between sort of physical disabilities and learning disabilities. Whilst, you know, this talk is about digital inclusion or exclusion, you know, if you have a physical disability, it is easier to access assistive technology to communicate and to talk to others around. Whereas if you have a learning disability, that is not as easy to access. So there's a definite inequity in provision across disabilities within England and within the world as well. So it's really important that whilst we look at disabilities in general, that we also concentrate on specifics and the nuances of those communities that have a learning disability as well.
Absolutely, and I think I'm very much looking forward to getting into the discussion around that as we build on this through the webinar today. David, you're in Dublin in Microsoft. Delighted you could join us.
Thanks, Gareth. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and interesting to talk about this today. Me, myself at Microsoft, Gareth, I'm a specialist in the Tech for Social Impact team, so we work with charities and not-for-profits to help enable them on their cloud journey in IT to further their business ambitions and the support they can provide for people. But more than that, I'm also a member of the internal group, the Disability Employee Resource Group, specifically raising accessibility awareness within Microsoft and offering support to any employees that have any needs in that area as well. So really looking forward to engaging this today.
Thanks a million, David. So let me just pop back. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop back to Harry and Lou, because I think it's very important that we take the experience that Lou's had over the many years working with people first. And Harry, perhaps you could actually elaborate a bit more and expand on what you were telling us about earlier in terms of learning disabilities and people with disabilities, the differentiation there.
Yeah, I mean, if we take the example of accessing a GP appointment, to actually go to a GP practice, to be able to interact with the touch screen that's on the GP wall is really difficult for someone with a learning disability. Some people are very able to read and to write, and then you have some other people that would really struggle with doing that. So the simplicity of actually just going to your GP is difficult. The ability to phone up and make an appointment is difficult. To try and explain what you want to a receptionist in a very short period of time is a challenge for someone with lived experience. Lou, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do, because obviously I can't see the screen very well. So going and having to put the touch screen, that's no good for me. But if ever I ring up and I request an appointment, I get told by the receptionist to use the e-consult, which is like an online thing. Well, I can't access that. But some receptionists are very good, because now that they know I can't do that, they will actually do that on my behalf. And getting an appointment, I often get told, oh, we've no appointments today. But where I live, which is 8 tenanted flats with 24/7 support and people with a wide range of learning disabilities, and I actually asked a member of staff one day, I said, how come, I said, without being rude, I said, how come you can get an appointment for such and such person on the same day, but when I ring up, I can't? And they've got another, you press 2 for appointments. But if you're a healthcare worker or a support worker or a professional of any kind, you press another option, and that bypasses the reception desk.
Okay. So there's an inequity in itself. It is, what we want is we want to encourage the people to have that parity of esteem and to be treated equally across the board. Yet we automatically put in a hierarchical system which precludes people from being able to access a simple thing like a GP appointment. You want people to be independent, you want people to do stuff for themselves, but yet if they're on their own and they don't have that support, they can't do it because the technology isn't there to enable them to do it. And the understanding of people who work in GP practices is not at the level where they can make those reasonable adjustments to enable someone with a disability, someone with a learning disability, to access the services that they're entitled to on a daily basis. So there's a definite difference there.
Yeah, and I think it'd be great. I mean, I know you have some questions there for Lou in terms of digital technology. How's that helped your life, Lou? I mean, has that made a big difference?
Yeah, it has, because I do have, because of my lack of vision, I have a mobile phone. It's an iPhone, but there's a bit in it, an accessibility feature, so then I can have the screen colour the way I want it, and it actually speaks to me. So many text messages I get, or on the internet on it, or whatever, it does actually speak to me, and it reads things out to me. And I've also got an iPad that does the same, and I also can read a little bit small print. So I've got like a special magnifier. It's like an electronic magnifier that does all this stuff, and I can read with that. And I've also got a laptop that I use for work with a speech program on it as well.
I suppose this is where you've kind of outlined some of the challenges that you face. Do you feel that there is challenges with the digital technology?
Can be with that, because sometimes, obviously, some of these equipment that you get these technology equipments. Like, for example, my screen reader that I've got, that costs £700. Well, if you're someone who doesn't have the money to get them, then you can't get them.
Yes.
And yes, there's sometimes funding available, but you don't always know where that funding stream actually is. I mean, I'm quite lucky because I do have that money behind me, but even if I didn't, I have a very supportive family who wouldn't see me go without things like that I needed.
So if you didn't have that funding, or we didn't
No.
have that support,
Yeah.
you know,
knackered, basically. Yeah.
you know, when you're trying to act, you know, you have to access that funding
Yes.
normally via the internet, via an online
exactly.
digital system,
Exactly.
and you can't do it because
No.
you either haven't got the tech to do it,
No.
or you haven't got the capacity to use the technology that you've got,
Exactly.
and you might not have the support or care that's in place to enable them to do it for you.
No, exactly.
So, you know, when we talked about the mortality rates for people with a learning disability being sort of 30 years younger than their peers,
Yeah.
you know, how is that possible? People will ask. Well, it's possible because people can't communicate correctly with their GP. They can't understand the feelings that they have within inside their own bodies, and being able to verbalize that to a professional is really difficult.
Well, it is.
So you know, people are still dying of constipation.
Yes.
Now, how can you imagine someone can die of constipation? It's unfathomable.
It is unfathomable. Oh yeah.
But they do, and the reason why that is because technology and the system doesn't allow people to verbalize and say what's wrong with them.
They don't.
You go for a GP appointment and you get your 7.5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not long enough for someone.
Not for someone who needs it. But if I can just interject here, I can remember watching, I think it was the morning programme, and there was somebody on there from MenCap talking about a report they'd done, and they said that some GPs thought that noises that people were making, they just thought that's what people with learning disabilities did. And I remember Philip Schofield at the time saying, and what the hell does that mean?
Very good, very good. But I think also, I mean, you're giving us a great insight, and I suppose, you know, UK is a G7 country. It's quite, you know, in terms it's quite advanced in terms of its social structures as well. And I'm very conscious of those who will be watching this webinar now, Lou and Harry, who will be living in countries who have zero access to this sort of technology.
Exactly.
They haven't advanced their economies enough, because we work with a lot of lower middle income countries, and I think this is where you know, what I'll do is I'll just nip over. I'll bring David into the conversation now, and maybe look at some of the technology solutions and have a quick chat with David around what Microsoft is doing. And David, just, you know, I mean, I was at UN UNGA recently, and I think your head of social corporate responsibility was there. You know, there's a new initiative coming across in terms of digital enablement. There's about 2.5 billion people who don't have access to medical care at the moment, you know, internet access. And we've heard the story from Lou and from Harry around, you know, how learning disabilities is a big challenge. You know, what are Microsoft doing to kind of like tackle this digital sustainability area? You know, maybe just give a wider context, because I know Microsoft are taking a bit of a leading role in this sort of space.
Yeah, because I mean, taking a step back, Gareth, I mean, for almost 10 years now, under Satya Nadella's leadership since 2014, Microsoft has really been on an expansive accessibility journey, learning journey, for almost 10 years now. And in that, if anything, one of the most important lessons we learned is that accessibility has to be central to everything we do, the company culture, everything we stand for from the get-go. And it can by no means be an add-on or an afterthought afterwards once we've developed something. So I mean, that's the first and foremost most important thing. And as part of that, a lot of the teams that can go and realize, as part of what we call Office 365, so all the Microsoft suite of tools, accessibility features are fully functioning part of all these tools. Up in the ribbon, you can find many tools, such as, like Lou was touching on, the dictate machine, immersive reader to help with distinct colors, making imagery larger, alt text for imagery. The list goes on. There's many things. But like you've touched on as well, there are underdeveloped part of the world where, besides digital technology not being embedded in that culture yet, internet connectivity can be the major challenge before we even come to digital technology. And I think moving things away from digital technology, as I've spoken about in talks recently, something else Microsoft has recently, or not recently, sorry, but has realized, is that when it comes to any discussion or conversation about accessibility or addressing accessibility, before we start throwing tools and apps at things, like Harry touched on, we have to understand culture and people are always at the center in the beginning of that conversation. So this is making sure that people understand that disability can represent ideas and perspectives that were often completely unrealized before. And because of that, this can enable strengths and talents in an environment or in an organization that were never realized before as well. So, I mean, organizations really have to adapt and embed inclusion in everything they do to realize this. And then, like similarly, like many GPs perhaps need to do, Harry, to start updating their staff to realize and understand this and adopt how they can provide their services. Because we can apply new technology in many ways to help people interact for booking and different services in that. But if the people at the location or the venue behind this technology aren't up to speed, that's where the big challenge comes in. And Microsoft has a range of certifications and education programs, both professionals and venues, to learn about these functionalities, but then also for populations and locations, wider locations, to come to understand the digital technologies that can be applied to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, and can you give just some examples? I mean, I know we've spoken before. I visited you a couple of months ago, and I seen there was school buses of kids arriving into Microsoft on a daily basis, and this educational kind of role, I think. And I was going to go back to Har and Lou after this and ask them about, you know, what they feel needs to happen. You know, what do you feel Microsoft's role is in this, you know, leaving no one behind, these as part of the sustainable development goals? You know, how can Microsoft take that leading role? I mean, it takes everyone, you know, we need a collective effort here.
Yeah, so I mean, what you're talking about there, Gareth, is an absolutely fantastic premises that we have in the Microsoft Dublin office. It's called Dream Space. Now, it looks like a big, large children's play area, kind of like you would get at the supermarket where you leave the kids for an hour to go and do your shopping. But, and it is exactly like you said as well, busload, so classroom after classroom, sometimes 3 or 4 a day come in there. And what children are learning now in school differs entirely to previous generations, how they can become that interactive part and contributive part of society as well. So we're trying to get them engaged with the technologies and not laying it out right front as in this is accessibility, this is why I need to start using these technologies, but just helping them to understand how they can engage technology and what benefit that can enable for them, so that when they do come to getting to secondary school, to next levels, or even going into college or employment, they take it as a given to engage with these accessible technologies. And they take that as a given when it comes to communicating with each other, like even just something as simple as using the accessibility checker before sending an email to make sure the text isn't causing any trouble. There's no contrasting colors. There's alt text where need be, all of these features.
Brilliant. Let me go back to Har and Lou. I mean, the barriers that you face, Lou, on a daily basis, and can you explain that to people who are listening in? I'd be very conscious. Like, we really want to hear from you, your opinion on the barriers, and what improvements would you like to see in the future?
Well, I'd like to see more accessibility for people who want to make a GP appointment. And like, for example, I'm quite lucky because if I've got somebody with me, I can get money out the cash machine. But if you don't have anybody with you, I think there should be more accessible tools for people. And if they do have accessible tools, then bring the prices down, because I think that's what is hard for people, is if they can't afford it, then, and there's no funding stream, they miss out. I mean, I'm quite lucky as well, because I am quite tech savvy, and everybody says, the people who, the staff in my home say to me that you're better than what we are. I might not always be able to fix the problem, but I always know when there is a problem. And whereas I don't like instruction manuals, because I think half the time what they tell you what button you have to press, because it's all full of diagrams and they make no sense, is what button you have to press, and what it tells you what to press and what you have to press, two different things. So I would much rather press each button and see what the button actually does.
Yeah, something interactive, so you can you know what you're actually doing. I mean, just to move the conversation away from health. If you just look at sort of at the moment, governments are doing changes within railway stations, and they're taking away ticket offices, and they're just going to have an automated system. Great if you can use the automated system.
If you can't use it, you're knackered, basically.
Yeah, if you can't use it, you can't use it. So therefore, you cannot travel to wherever you want to travel to. You know, people. Some people have a disability travel card. To actually use that travel card with the digital system that's being put in place is really difficult. So that once again precludes people from traveling and going to see friends, family, going to appointments, whatever it might be. And to take a slightly different slant, engagement is key. Co-production is massive. I suppose a question that I would ask of David is, have you engaged with the learning disability population with regards to the accessible tools that Microsoft use? How have they informed your organization of the changes that need to be put in place to make tech more accessible to them? And then an add-on question to that would be, we as a system, we tend to want people to come to us to tell us what we need to do. My contest would be, we need to go to them. We need to go to where they are and ask them the questions about what we want to be put in place and how we want to develop this digital technology that we have. Any thoughts?
Yeah, 100%, Harry. Couldn't agree anymore. Harry and Lou, both of you completely spot on. Nothing about us without us, as the saying goes.
Yes.
And this really reminds me of or take a step back and answer your questions first. There is actually a team, the Microsoft Accessibility team. They're actually over in America. The people that work in the team have the disabilities themselves. They engage with the disability community. And there's a couple of good examples I'll give you. And one of them was actually in a talk I gave recently at Microsoft. The example we give, where people with disabilities have to be, like I said, can't be a bolt-on, can't be an afterthought. People with disabilities need to be included in the conversation, anything around innovation or development from the get-go, to make sure everything gets addressed. The go-to example there was when we spoke at first, how we can address development for people with disabilities, but at the end of the day, it actually does benefit everybody. So we design for the few, but we implement for the many. An example there, the bendy straw, one of the simplest examples. These were originally developed and used for hospitals for people with limited mobility, but then because they were just handy, and especially for children and different things, it just became wide use everywhere. That's one standard example. Fast forward a few decades, single-use plastic, which is used to create these bendy straws, big no-no. I'm sure Gareth will agree with me there. Single-use plastics, one of the evils of the earth. So in parts of America, they actually stopped producing the plastic straws and started changing to use makeshift paper straws and different things. Long story short, they did this sporadically with the good intentions of removing those single-use plastics. But what happened was the paper kind of card straws that were made for replacements were no good. They weren't useful. Metal straws, you couldn't put them into mass production. More than that, they conducted the heat and the cold from some of the drinks as well, which could lead to negative experiences there. The bottom line from that was people with disabilities should have been included in that conversation from the get-go. It would have saved time, it would have saved money, and as a joke I made at the time talking about it as well, it would have saved a few people getting burnt lips with the metal straws. So that's one element where people with disabilities should always be included in the conversation from the get-go. So we have the team over in America as well. Harry, was there something else you asked as well, wasn't there, I meant to touch on?
Yeah, it was just around, it's gone straight out of my head now.
Oh.
Can you remember, Lou?
No, I can't.
Well, I mean, I'm just linking in with what you were saying there. So, you can make these, and linking in with what Lou said before about instruction manuals. Anything that's normally produced is produced for the normal population.
Yes.
Whereas someone with a learning disability requires easy read.
Yeah.
Something that's symbol based, but with few words, to enable them to access those instructions and understand how that particular piece of kit works.
Yeah.
And that's something that isn't done at all well by anybody other than people who work within the sort of the learning disability or disability sort of organisations.
Yeah.
Are you looking at anything around that with regards to easy read?
So, I mean, digitally speaking, we do have the means and the tools to very much enable all of that. When it comes to instructions, though, I think in that part, we're almost most of the time speaking about printed and paper and stuff. So rather than addressing that with technology, I think that's where we need to look at what policies and legislations are in place when it comes to whether it's UK or EU or US legislation in place for any instructions must meet such and such standards. So I think that's where the Microsoft accessibility team has been quite involved and quite contributed towards the WCAG policies there, for example, and framework as well. So I think we will always be included, and we are always pushing for these legislations and policy changes. But again, it all comes back to education at the start of it.
I have remembered what I was going to say before, the other part of the question. It was about going to them, as opposed to expecting the expectation of people to come to you and then you learn from them. What about you going to actually where they are and asking those questions?
Yeah. So that's something else I was remembering as well. Thanks for bringing that back, Harry. So to give an example of that point, then, what comes to mind? The other day we were talking about what was happening during the COVID pandemic. And this was where 2 weeks into the pandemic, we saw that, I mean, another point to make is that unemployment rates for people with disabilities or learning disabilities is at its best twice as bad as what it is for your everyday unemployment rate. When the pandemic cropped up, immediately that jumped fivefold. But on top of that as well, within 2 weeks at Microsoft, we saw a 200% increase in what we call the Disability Answer Desk, DAD for short. And this is where people can call up this desk to ask simple questions about how to use and facilitate all the accessibility tools and features that are part of the Office suite. To add to that, we saw a 560% increase in immersive reader usage and a 30% increase on Teams captions, which are also incredible towards accessibility to help with communications. On the back of that, the Microsoft disability community, they have their own internal blog, were actually huge towards the implementation and enablement of the tools that were used to enable remote education during the pandemic, remote working, accessible events, and even accessible gaming, which became all the more realized during the pandemic and the lockdowns as well. So long story short, yes, there is a disability community within Microsoft and they can take feedback, absolutely.
Okay, thanks for the insights, Dave and Lou and Harb. So we've got about between 5 and 10 minutes left in the webinar, and I really want to try and get some hard questions into you guys before we wrap up. So the real challenge, and this is really, Lou, your experience here. What would you like to see done in the future? Can you share any words of wisdom? Your experience over the last 30 years. What has worked well?
Well, I think what's worked well is it's important, as I said, to co-produce things with people rather than just say, right, this is what we've got, this is it. I've done a lot of, like, for example, with another group I'm involved in, we have done the annual report, and we have actually done that jointly rather than it's called the leader group, and it's looking at premature deaths, and I'm on that group. So rather than them doing the report and then us doing a little bit of the accessibility side of it, we've actually done the report between us. Brilliant. Which I think has worked well. So I think that is important. And I just also think in life, whether it be technology or whatever it is, concentrate more on what people's capabilities are rather than what they can't do. Yeah, that's one thing I was taught when I was at school. I used to say, I can't do this. And they used to say, there's no such word as can't.
It's interesting you mentioned schools there. Yeah. That was going through my mind, Lou, about, we need to start early with young people.
Yes,
and giving them the information and the technology to enable them to access the world around them. And it was really nice, David, you mentioned about the schools coming into the dream space in Dublin. A question I would ask you is, how many special schools have you had come into your dream space in Dublin? Specialist communication colleges with people with a multitude of different disabilities. Have they been able to access your dream space? And then, to the wider population who are listening to this webinar, what have you done to enable young people with a disability, and especially a learning disability, from my point of view, to access your services and learn from what you do? And basically, if we start young and we have early intervention, when these guys get older, they're going to be more savvy, more able to cope with the changes that are happening from a technological point of view, which puts them in a good place to look after themselves and to be part of their communities. But it also means that from a system point of view, it's easier for the system to develop new ways of working for people with a disability.
And just before David comes in and answers those questions, Harry, how can we and Lou, how do we make this? I think we need more awareness here. Is that like an engagement process? We need to raise the awareness threshold. More of that?
Yeah, I think we definitely need more awareness. Definitely. What do you think, Harry?
I would agree. And it's a case of, well, how do we get that awareness? So is it a conference? Is it a workshop? Whatever it is, how do we get people with that expertise to be in one place to share best practice and to share learning, and then be able to enable, which will then enable other organisations to put more accessible tools in place for people, not just with a learning disability, but with any disability.
What I see at the moment, we our media, we don't get to hear these stories, unfortunately. That's what I feel. I mean, I'm speaking quite candidly here. I don't think people are aware, and we don't give enough time to this topic. But it's a significant topic. You've almost 1.5 billion people. And I think that, when we talk about leaving no one behind, we are leaving a significant number of people behind. And I think that there's, through this webinar, I'm sitting here, I'm in awe at the experiences that Lou is sharing with us. And I think it's invaluable for us as a community to learn more about these experiences so that we can co-create solutions together. That's part of this breaking down this barrier. but I think we are way off course. And Harry, you're in this space, we really need to do a lot more of this, don't we? Is that a given?
It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, definitely.
Yeah,
I think
definitely need to do more.
Yeah, we do.
David, just going then finally to you, and I'll maybe a final word to Lou and Harry as well. Just Harry was making a number of points there. Do you have any comments on that, like in terms of the green space, special needs children, and talk about the youth engagement within Microsoft? He asked about are people engaged?
They are indeed, and actually, Harry was going to say it was just back in. No, my memory's shocking here. I think it was about April or May was the last time we had an assistive education school into the dream space to have our education session there. And it's absolutely fascinating to see the uptake in the interactions. And like I said, to really see those strengths and talents shine through that people have from having to interact with society in different ways. And to add something else you said as well about making more noise. You took the exact words out of my mouth, where I said to an internal session the other day there, when we see Microsoft every day in the news for whatever reason, whether they're saying good things or bad things, we don't see them talking about all these incredible earth-changing, life-changing, accessible technologies. We need to see them talking more about this. And that's what I said to them. We need to make more noise. So internally, we're getting together as groups to run projects externally with organisations such as People First, particularly more here in Ireland, of course, to run initiatives and programmes together. But again, similar to reports you worked on, Lou, to pull that information together, that's key to have access to that information as well. So I think it's definitely a catalyst to bring all these points together. Efforts can be made, good efforts can be made.
So I'm going to ask this question to Lou and Harry as well before we wrap up. Are you optimistic for the future here with learning this, like from a disability perspective and learning disability perspective? So Dave, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic. Yeah, because I do think things are better than they were even 30, 40 years ago. But in some aspects, we do have a bit more to go, but the majority of it, I think we have come a long way.
I think if you compare life now,
yes,
compared to 30 years ago, like Lou said, there's huge differences that have been made.
Yes.
Massive changes in people's opinion on disabilities, people's opinion, especially with from learning disabilities. The assistive technology that's available is brilliant. It's great. So at this moment in time, I'm optimistic. There's lots of opportunities, but what we need to do is capitalize on it. And the only way we can capitalize on it is if we talk to people with a disability and ask them what they want and how they would interact with those technologies. Yeah. And then we know that the technology will be used, just to, someone who's non-verbal, so someone that can't talk, how do they access a GP appointment if they want to do it themselves? How do they get from point A to point B on a bus or in a taxi if you can't talk?
Exactly.
Do they have the technology to enable them to do that? Yes, it's out there. You've got eye gaze, you've got Dynavox, you've got lots of different things that people can use to communicate, but not everyone has access to it. So we need to make sure that we engage correctly, we co-produce, and we make sure that everything is accessible for all.
Yeah, thanks very much. Dave, just the last word from yourself before I wrap up the session, and I'll do a short summary.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose just to kind of to draw on what Harry just pointed out there, we have the technology, we have the people, we have the means, we have all that's needed. We need catalysts to bring these elements and these features together to help really progress like we need to see. But as Lou pointed out, we're moving in the right direction. We'll get there.
Well, thanks a million, Dave, Harry, Lou. It's been a real pleasure. I think this session has really opened my eyes in terms of we need a lot more activism here. We need a lot more engagement. I think the question always comes back as well, to finance. where's the investment coming from? I think, again, the sort of platforms that we're creating here through the World Health Innovation Summit are various platforms, working with People First and Microsoft, being able to convene these discussions. I think we can actually find solutions. I think the investment business case that comes into this is a no-brainer either. I also think, as you said, the means are there. I think we hear this all the time. There's huge opportunities in this space when you look at the size of the community and the need that's there. I think there's a lot of action points that we need to take from this, and I think this is probably the start of a wider discussion. And how do we actually create a forum, maybe between World Health Innovation Summit, People First, Microsoft, and various other partners? How do we bring these challenges and opportunities to a wider audience? And I'm very much looking forward to that opportunity in the next few months as we explore those opportunities. So, for those who are tuning in, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar on disabilities and inclusion. And if you have any questions in the comment box, we'll get back to you. Sorry we missed some of those questions while we've been on air. But we'll also share all the links in terms of contact details. And I hope that you've enjoyed this session, and we'll close this out. But I think as everyone's kind of outlined, we are optimistic for the future. We can do a lot together. Collaboration is key. The partnerships, SDG 17, partnerships for the goals, that's going to be a key driver to ensuring that we leave no one behind. So from myself, David, and Lou, I'll just say thanks for joining us, and we'll end this webinar. So